Let's see, is this working? Is this working? Make sure that's muted for starters. Yes, it is working. Well, hey. Did I get some sleep? Yes, I did. Now, you have to tell me, if you end up hearing too much traffic noise, you'll have to tell me, and I'll close the window. But at the moment, I've left it open because, frankly, I like the fresh air. Afternoon, Albert. Afternoon, Stephen. Afternoon, Jay. Afternoon, Michael. Afternoon, Kevin. Thank you, Kevin. Afternoon, Greg. Afternoon, Blue Shirt Buddha. Hello to New York. Hello, Richard. Hello, Martin. Hello, John. Hello, everyone. Hope you're all well. Hello, Potter. Hello, King George V. You're not late. You're perfectly on time for you. You're always fairly on time, King George V. Right then. Enjoy, Paul. Angus, thank you very much. Thank you. I'm doing well. I am Brew on one side, Coca-Cola on the other. I'll make sure that's lined up properly a bit more. It's very, very hot today. It's incredibly hot. I've already got through about 8 of these bottles filled with water. So, you know, it's been a fun day. Make sure that's more visible. So, how are you doing? You may want to turn vibration off on the phone. It should be off on the phone, but let me check. We can hope it stays off now. It should be off. Camera and sound working together. That is good. That is always a good start. Right, and today we're talking about the ships of the Convoy War. Ooh. See what? My collection books are overaged. Need to restart. 26 degrees. I'm not sure how hot it is here, but it's certainly hotter in this room. But, you know, hey ho. So today we're talking about the Convoy War and the ships of the Convoy War, and they're a pretty interesting bunch to me. They really are. I'm going to print some of the slides off and make sure some of the slides are ready. I'm gonna, yeah, occasionally traffic does pass through, but my hope is it won't be so much that it'll be a problem. If it does, I'll close the window. So how are you doing? Did you all manage to watch at least some of the introductory videos? Because, well, that's why I put them up there. But also because I thought you might find some of them fun. Naval control of shipping forever. Found all four fun. On topic question, a rarity I know. What is the smallest ship that can be used in the Atlantic for convoy patrol? Well, you see, the thing is, those trawlers, which I did in the little ships, quite a few of those 600-ton odd ships got used. The trouble was, you can use it for a convoy duty, but can it keep up with the convoy, and can it catch up with the convoy if it's had to prosecute attack? That was the big problem. There are lots of ships you can use as a convoy escort, but they're a one-shot escort. Osprey 28, I am Brew and I'm my furry assistant on my lap. I'm ready for the stream. Congratulations. My furry assistant is downstairs, currently lapping up ice from his water bowl. can I explain sloops again? I'm definitely going to explain sloops again. First of all, I'm going to print something off to help me explain sloops again, as it might seem strange, but that's my current cunning plan. The trouble is, the lovely slides I put together for the presentation, I printed out a version before this, and it's absolutely terrible. So I'm having to quickly rejig and improvise a bit and reprint. But that really doesn't usually, that usually actually makes me slightly better, I think, in my mind, because I usually, when I have a plan, I just relax into it. When I have something to think about, you know, I get there quicker. Right then, bing, bing, bing. And that's all done. Now, the joy about sloops is you have two treaties written. You have the treaty in 1930, which is the first naval treaty which a certain Admiral Henderson gets called on to take part of from the British side. And you have Article 8 written. And then you have 1936. You have another London treaty. And Article 1, Category B, Section 5 gets written. And it's all a load of fun and games, really, at that point. Because at that point, the Royal Navy has really made the sloops their crux for how they're developing anti-submarine warfare. And I swear, if they'd wanted to, they could have actually said they've got to be faster, they can be faster than 20 knots. That was put in by the Americans mainly, and it caused the Americans more trouble than it did the British. Because the Americans were looking at a presence patrol ship, and the Brits were looking for something which was far more a amphibious warfare, a sort of convoy and amphibious warfare ship. Kelly Bean, the DMs like North Sands, Park and Forts were more heavily armed than some of the escorts. My uncle was killed in the SS. Yep. Carl Gangman, many rescue ships in convoys were small. Yes, they were. Many rescue ships were the small ships. They tended to be the smaller merchant ships because the idea was they could catch up. King George V, do I know about HMS Agincourt? Yes, but she's rather outsized for a convoy escort. She was quite good in World War One. I appear to have run out of paper. Let's see how many it's printed off. Where did it get to? Well, actually, that's far enough in for me to use for today. I can definitely use those ones. I don't know, but at least they're printed this time, and this time they're okay. Right then. So let's start off with sloops, because I know I started off with corvettes with the videos because, frankly, I know corvettes often get more talked about, and I wanted to, you know, give them a bit of a chance to talk about other things, basically. A bit of a chance to talk about other things. In car, when you refer to range in the early year or escorting was only to mid-Atlantic, then turn around and escort a different convoy. Okay, right, so I'll start off with sloops and then I'll deal with that one. Now, pretty much, sloops. Article 8 of the Naval Treaty is what we've been talking about, and the various definitions of what they can do, mainly from 1930. But in 1936, there's another treaty written which basically removes mount more than 4 guns above 3-inch 76mm caliber. That gets deleted. And then you pretty much have the same, it's deleted into the treaty. And that's the 1936 one. They're not allowed to mount to 6.1, any gun above 6.1 inches. They're not allowed to mount torpedoes, and they're not allowed to be designed for a speed greater than 20 knots. Please remember that phrase, designed for a speed greater than not 20 knots. So if you, as long as you tell the designer, Director of Naval Construction, absolutely do not design that ship to go faster than 20 knots. And on trials, my goodness me, it does 24 knots. DNC, did you design it to go faster than 20 knots? No, sir, I did not. We have obeyed the letter of the law. Evening, Ian. Hunter-killer groups begin in mid-43, really. Well, technically they begin in early 1943, but you only have a couple of them, really. They really properly get going mid-43 when you have enough escorts. It's like the escorts of the convoys. You can only do the convoys in terms of enough escorts when you have enough escorts, and you can only do the hunter groups when you have enough ones on top of that. So let's go back to part 2 of the video, and I put this up, and I'm gonna quickly flick away from the chat so I can see if it's visible, and if it's visible I'll continue on. Right, so the nice big thing is you can see nicely where the circulation of kills are. So this is between 1940 and 1942-ish, really. And you see the kills start off around the UK. Still around the UK. 1941, February, still mostly quite close to the UK, just outside Ireland. And then it starts to move into the Mid-Atlantic. And then it gets more spread about. But again, it started to concentrate off the coast of America. And then, woof! And actually, one of the biggest battles you have in terms of a trade war is down here, right inside the Pan-American Neutrality Zone. And that's in 1942, which might explain why South America so swiftly turned anti-Germany. That's where all their trade was going up. Yes, America had entered the war, but they hadn't. And suddenly you're taking out their ships. It tends to piss people off. Can't think why. Anyway, so the often heard thing I will hear from people is, oh, the escorts didn't go the whole way across, or the escorts didn't do all this. Actually, that's not quite the case. Destroyers often didn't go the full way across. So the destroyers would often be attached to a convoy in its, especially in the early years, when it's at the point of highest risk. However, there was usually I say this, a cruiser in distant coverage the most of the way across because of surface radar threats, or a battleship or something like that would be in cover to deal with surface raiders, because surface raiders were still very much a threat, in fact incredibly a threat at the beginning of the war. And also, and this is where you get really upset usually people, sloops and some of the early corvettes, especially the Flowers and some of the trawlers, would also steal those groups, because whilst the majority of kills were appreciated to be in one area, the Royal Navy had no faith when they'd stay in there. The Germans weren't going to send them a nice message going, oh, we're now going to expand the kill zone. And so the Royal Navy had to prepare for the worst scenario. So yes, we often hear about convoy escorts going out, joining with the convoys about halfway across and then taking away. Well, at the beginning, that was the reinforcements which would take them halfway across, and towards the end what you had was the American escort groups would take a convoy into the middle and then take another convoy back, and they basically, the British escort group would they'd swap convoys halfway through the Atlantic. So the British escort, the heavy escort group, but there would still be some escorts, usually from the Royal Canadian Navy by the end of the war, who would go the whole way across and the whole way back, the whole way across and the whole way back. Martha Sims saved the sleep. Calvin Gasper, if HMS Dreadnought was a good ASW vessel, HMS Harleston Corps would be a good escort. Possibly, she could have been, but she never actually did get that kill. Calvin Corvettes are very often referred to on the other side of the Atlantic. Frigates much less, and the sloops never. The Canadians never built some sloops, and that's the thing. And the Americans bought corvettes and frigates. The Canadians also bought corvettes and frigates. Ian Carr, why was the treaty updated and whose request? Well, it was time to update the naval treaty to try and make everyone, you know, happier with it, because there were people who were unhappy with the naval treaty because they didn't feel they were getting their fair share. And just so you know, the Royal of Britain decided to suddenly volunteered to host it. And very quickly, Britain gets all sorts of things on it. Basically, 1936 is an incredibly good year for the Royal Navy. Incredibly good year if you want to get what you want done. And it does turn into a very good year. Jermac, HMS King George V, battleships as far escort raid against raiders. They were often there as well, out there as escorts against surface raiders. King George V, what was the largest ship used for escorting in the Second World War? HMS Hood, I think, did a convoy escort as well, so technically she could have been, but also some Iowas and all sorts of things. Morning, RAF4. M. Hayward, when you talk about how the RN got around treaties, I begin to understand why we are called perfidious Albion. We didn't get round treaties. We wrote them so that we were completely fine with them. That was the thing. It's one of the interesting things when I love John Jordan's book, and I've commented about it enough times in the past, you know I'm not making that up. It's a lovely book on the treaties and warships after Washington. But, and I would be the first to tell him this, and I think have done at a conference from memory, he misses one of the big thing about the British in this, and he's sitting going, not all sides suffered equally. The British were very good at making sure the clauses written in would benefit them in some respects. They were very good at the diplomacy of naval reform. It comes from all those presence missions. It comes from doing all that work in peacetime. You know, the bases in the Western Pacific. Well, to be honest, the only power which that really helps is Britain, because we're the only ones who have to go furthest into to get the Pacific, and we already have bases there enough for our needs. For Japan, it stops them securing the Western Pacific, and for the Americans, it's a difficult one. The replacement capital ship program. Honestly, it causes more trouble for the nations with the newer capital ships than the ones with the older ones. Because the older ones can be replaced sooner, and who has the oldest capital ships in service in a major fleet? Remember, they're predicting war to be in the 1940s. Who can replace them soonest? And, you know, all sorts of things, like the fact is that also the Royal Navy had, on average, a longer range of firepower than the US Navy, according to the US Navy itself, with their terms of their capital ships. The average range of fire for the Royal Navy was about 25,000 yards. The average range of fire for the US Navy was 22,000 yards. It's not good. And that was the US Navy's own estimates. The Royal Navy was, of course, carefully making sure they didn't realise how far their guns could fire. Tony Penfold, that's a new twist on designed for but not with. Yeah. Captain Martin Sims, Captain Walker, the father of the Hunter Killer Group. Yes, he was, and he was a noted sloop commander. He had been commanded sloops in his time in the Far East prior to World War II, and then he comes back and he commands sloops again. Sloops were in many ways considered an elite group to be part of in the Royal Navy, like the Tribal Class Destroyers. They were their own elite. They were the anti-submarine warfare experts of the Royal Navy, not the destroyers. the sloop captains were. See what? Didn't HMS Centurion get some extra duty with dummy guns to look like HMS King George V? Yes, she did. Richard Hughes, I really enjoyed the frigate meme. We all do. I have to say, I am really enjoying Discord and the memes on there. It's really good. And just while I'm remembering, hi to my mum, hi to my sister, hi to my girlfriend, the wonderful, who sent me this lovely iron brew, and hi to Anne, her mum, and to Eric. I think her dad might also be watching. So hello, everyone. With fun of the printer at the beginning, I forgot to say hello to you all. US Coast Guard cutters served as escorts. Yes, in fact, they were considered the counterparts of the Royal Navy sloops, and some of them ran up a far, far greater killing record than the US Navy's destroyers did. In fact, I have this lovely book. Because I thought this might come up, the book I have out sitting next to me is, of course, this one. And if I turn to pretty much any chapter I want, but I will turn again to the ones in February. Let's see. There is in escort groups. There is the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Ingram. There is USCG Alexander Hamilton, USCG Campbell. It's amazing also, by the way, some of the American escort groups are decidedly interesting because the Americans had a shortage of small escorts, especially in the Atlantic. So this is the American escort group, TU-4111. Canadian destroyer Ottawa in refit, Corvette Palampheus, RN, Celadine, RN, Amherst, and Fennel. Yeah. Then we've got TU for 4.1.12 with Canadian destroyer St. Laurent and the corvettes Hepatica, Pictou, Bustouche, Mousjor, and Battleford. TU4. Basically, the most common escorts I'm seeing in the American escort force are Canadian destroyers and Coast Guard cutters of the US Coast Guard cutters. The US Navy definitely has a shortage of destroyers going on. Martin Doherty, wasn't Admiral King against convoys on US East Coast, hence the second happy time, and RN had to supply the ASN with ASW ships? Basically, Admiral King's view on convoys was that if he didn't have the escorts, he shouldn't lay them on, because it puts all the ships together, and just makes it easier for the enemy. He didn't have the escorts, he hadn't managed to build the escorts, so that was what his option was doing. He was basically early First World War RN. We don't have the escorts, therefore putting the forces together would be bad. However, it gets solved by the Royal Navy and what would become the third largest navy in the world, the Royal Canadian Navy. And the US Coast Guard as well, doing a hell of a lot of work. Excuse the French. In Card, Rodney was escorting convoy when diverted to the Bismarck. Yes. As was half the other ships involved in the hunt for Bismarck. Basically, a lot of convoys got left hanging. Raphael, 1981. Good evening, Alexander Clark. Did I read your slide on the Flower Class in year number 1 intro correctly? The Kriegsmarine had Flower Class Corvettes. Yes, they found 4 under construction in France, and they managed to complete 3 of them. So the Flower Class served on both sides in World War II, with distinction. RAF4. RN Unicorn, a masterpiece of the subtle art of driving a Mack truck through a loophole. Men with respect, mind you. Yeah, it it's a skill. Danny Freeman, RF, they were being built for, yeah. So, what were the earliest the R-class battleships could be replaced? Well, the earliest the R-class could be replaced was theoretically the King George V was to replace the R-class. So theoretically, when HMS King George V was supposed to be into service really 1939, 1940, the R-class was supposed to start being retired at that point. But as World War II was starting up and everyone was tensions, no one was actually retiring battleships at this point. Right then. Maximum range for RN battleships approximately, let's get this table out. So, according to the Secretary of the Navy in the United States, Nelson, Rodney all had a maximum range of 34,300 yards. Hood had a maximum range of 30,300 yards. And then the R's and Queen Elizabeth class had a range of about 24,300 yards. But the Americans, whilst they had West Virginia, Colorado, Maryland, all with 34,500 yards, so 200 yards more than Nelson Rodney, quickly dropped down because, well, it goes down to 24,000, down to 21,000 by your time you're at Pennsylvania. Arizona's at 20,900, and all sorts of issues. This is why the US Navy had wanted to improve the ability of their guns to aim higher so they could get further. What they didn't realise was that the Royal Navy had, how do I put this politely, sort of undersold their firepower in terms of how capable the explosive charge was that could be put in the guns and how long a range it would get. You know, these things, just, you know, it's operational security and it's need to know. And Steph Thompson, learn accurate fire. You'd think they'd be better in a flat car. You know, here, a long range fire, accurate fire. These things, the whole point about battleships was they were supposed to be able to hit these things at this range. Thank you, Daniel. Stephen Pedring, the George V class were planned as replacements for the R class. Yep. Believe USN used British Aztec and renamed it sonar? Pretty much. The Americans had been developing sonar for a while, and then British sent them Aztec and they went, this works, that doesn't, we'll call it sonar. And the annoying thing is the British keep calling it Aztec. The Canadians and etc. and everyone else who's building, basically, sonar gets adopted thanks to NATO standards, and it's just sometimes easier to explain it as sonar. It seems odd that the sloops were more surface orientated than corvettes. They were both quite undersea surface orientated and quite good at air defense. Sloops had better air defense. Sloops were often actually used as the escort group leader. Believe it or not, Black Swans were very, very often in charge of escort groups. Even when there were V&W class destroyers and frigates and corvettes there, you'd find a sloop placed as used as the command ship. Danny Freeman, I feel someone should create a Twitter profile similar called the Furry Research Assistant, or is it Fluffy? Basically, he will answer to both. I think I usually call him the Furry Research Assistant, but he can also be answered to the Fluffy one. He is a poodle. Gordon Collins, when you have two ships attacking a sub, i.e. one fixing the position and one charging in the attack, how did they stop two different sonar sets from interfering with each other? The one attacking turned it off. So they basically relied on the data from the one with fixing it, signals, lots and lots of flashing lights, sometimes radio communications, all sorts of things going on. And you must remember also, the pingers were often transmitted by radio communication from different sonar sets back to the command ship. so the command ship and the escort group commander could hear, and this is what Johnny Walker especially did, but lots of them did this one, could hear what other ships were hearing back. So they were often sharing data, and data was shared. So, you know, one would be pointing out target, the other one coming in for the kill. Albert Zabisky, were sloops built on purpose as ASW ships, or got this role additionally? Like, oh, by accident, we have these wonderful ships ideal for this role. Yeah, it's one of those things. They're certainly built with it in mind, but they're also built with minesweeping, light patrol duties, presence missions. I have this example here, and this is the sloop conversions, and it's from which book? This little book behind me. This one on sloops. Okay, so for duty on the China Station, based on Hong Kong, involved the early sloops and defence plans for the colony, which, amongst other matters, required the laying of minefields. To provide the necessary capability, plans were made for the sloops to be capable of limited mine lay effort. This involved the removal of topweight, i.e. the minesweeper gear, excluding winch, X-gun, and rigging, mining rails after the necessary rails and gears being held locally ashore. After about 24 hours was required to carry out this work, after which the ships could embark and lay manually 32 buoyant mines. By the way, those 24 hours would be done by the crew. They didn't need any dockyard assistance. The minesweeping to anti-submarine and sloop to mine layer conversion could almost all be undertaken without dockyard assistance. That's the thing. They were designed with those generic capabilities built in, and it would quite quickly be adapted to the role. Black Swans, though, I would say were very much anti-submarine warfare designed. In other words, was the RN planning that there will be convoy operations in next war? Yes, they were. The RN implemented convoy within... Actually, I think... all the orders and everything else seems to have gone out actually before war was officially declared, so that the convoys were ready to go. And literally, war's on, convoys. And whatever escorts we have are what we go with until we can get more. And that's also one of the reasons why you then have everything stopped for a crash build of convoy escorts. The reason they're crash building the convoy escorts is because it will be a convoy war. So that's the reason, the judgment they make to stop the building on the aircraft carriers, on the battleships, on everything else, to crash build escorts, because they need them. Danny Freeman. So Admiral King didn't believe the operations research on convoys being safer even if unescorted. Doesn't seem so as far as my reading goes. Also, inter-service politics stopped the US Army Air Force from helping with various other patrols. Yeah, that was annoying of them. There's a lot of discussion of how beautiful the King George V was. HMS King George V. Wait, so the British were worse than the American ship? Well, technically, the Americans could technically shoot further, and this was in the Americans' estimates. Remember, this is from the Americans' own intelligence table. The British intelligence table actually has very accurate figures for the Americans' ability to shoot and ranges. Has slightly different figures for the British ones. Slightly different. I'd say they're about equal. Greetings, Kai. Stafford Thompson, Doug Clark, even trade, so enough for the Mark 38 fire control system? Pretty much. Martin Doherty, I heard corvettes were designed for close shore escorts around UKX and would roll like barrel in the Atlantic. In the nicest way, they go across an Atlantic and all sorts of things. They're not fun to be in. They're a small ship in a big sea. It's not fun to be in them, but they're better than nothing, and they do the job. let's put it this way. HMS Sackville has actually, HMCS Sackville has actually been out at sea today, and has actually been, you can see her moving in a fairly calm sea. But think about this: 940 tons is the original one. That's a length of 62.5 meters, a beam of 10.1 meters, and a draft of 3.51 meters. Propulsion gives them a top speed of 16 knots and a range of 3,500 miles at 12 knots. Okay, 85 in the original. And all this stuff is crammed with a radar, a sonar, a 4-inch gun, a twin some machine guns, 2-pounder pom-pom, a twin more machine guns, all sorts of cannon, a whole host of depth charges. We're talking 40 depth charges on 2 throwers and 2 rails, all crammed into that space. That. It's going to be tight. It's going to be cramped. It's also the bare minimum. If you look at some of the armament for the smaller sloops, this is the armament which was worked out for them as the bare minimum weapon system for an anti-submarine warfare escort. You have the 4-inch gun in case the submarine is on the surface. And let's be honest, that might not be much of an advantage against a submarine, but it's going to work. It's what they have. You have the depth charges, you have the sonar, you have all the things you do for it. Right then. In-car, is the French AMX receiver you refer to Huff-Duff, or is this different? It's similar. It's to an extent similar to Huff-Duff, but not quite the same. It's different in a respect because Huff-Duff is also is advanced to certain other things as well throughout the war. Kevin Tang, was it sloops or corvettes that were never sunk in the war? Both were sunk. Both were honestly sunk. Frigates, only 5 of them got sunk out of 151, so that's fairly never sinking. Paul, I'm glad you've got I've got your full attention. Daniel Freeman, not only I had heard the same, but they also learned that the North Sea and some of the other close seas around the British Isles is some of the nastiest water going. Yeah, that's the other thing. And the nicest way, if you design something for the North Sea, it's then the North Atlantic, which is what most of the stuff going around Scotland's going to be going into. You know, pretty much you're designing it for an Atlantic crossing anyway. In car, could you leave sleeper adaptation equipment ashore? Was it liable to be nicked? It was theoretically left ashore. In fact, that's what they did in peacetime, certainly in the Far East. In wartime, what fits on sloops fits on destroyers and fits on frigates, and what fits on frigates and fits on destroyers fits on sloops. It's fun times. Martin Doherty, they were attracted when ship design. Yes. Basically, the Royal Navy had been already looking at trawlers and had already built some experimental trawlers in the 1930s, which would use the whaling ship design. And that design, they'd worked out what the bare minimum armament was to be on a small sloop. So they'd use let's say they build a small sloop and gone, does this work? Okay, so we can get this one, which is the hull, which allows us to replicate this weapon system and this weapon mix on the most commercial building sites available. And that's the thing. You've got to remember, they're basically taking the sloop top part, the structure, and putting it on top of a trawler or a whaling ship in the case of the Flower Class. Ronan Cash, sorry I'm late, was playing Silent Hunter 5 and lost track of time on my U-boat. appropriate. My ex-wife's cousin was a geologist, so was in North Sea trying to do oil geology work. My own experience of the Thessalonian free, also not nice. Yeah, basically the seas around the UK can get pretty rough. In car, probably no less comfortable than the merchant ships. Pretty much that's it. In Happy, did the Hunts have enough range to be effective cross-Atlantic escorts? Broadly speaking, yes. They managed. They got backwards and forwards. That's what they all did. But they also they were refueled on way and on way back quite often as well. A lot of the escort carriers were also oilers, which would fuel up their escorts. So the escort carriers would often be doubling duties. So when you say, oh, the Royal Navy didn't have an oiler in this task group, and you go, does it have an escort carrier? Yeah. Have you checked what type of escort carrier that is? You can have a lot of fun conversations with some of these things. Douglas Clark, was there a functional difference between RN corvettes and USN destroyer escorts? Angus O'Donnell. Functional, no. In terms of their construction, the destroyer escorts were built to far more naval standards than the more commercially driven hulls and design of the Flower Class, and less than though in the Castle Class. But honestly, the interesting thing about the destroyer escorts, especially the American ones, was they're very much designed with the destroyer, and the smaller, fatter corvettes the Royal Navy was producing were actually turned out to be better at anti-submarine warfare in terms of the manoeuvring required. Danny Freeman, Martin Doherty, merchant ships often bigger and much smaller crews. Yeah, but yes, but their level of comfort in terms of the ways was probably not that great either. Oh, Martin Doherty, and after that, so most of the war on convoys based out of Simonstown in South Africa. And the reason he joined RN was because his merchantman was bombed and had a squaddy with a Lewis gun. Yeah, pretty much. South Africa, you have convoys all around the world. That's the thing. You have convoys going on around the world. As you also have Italian subs to deal with. You have Japanese subs to deal with. Occasionally you have Allied subs which have got lost to deal with. Kevin Tones, thanks. Couldn't remember what he talked about in part 3 of this morning video. Kai Anderson, did the UK and US share their sonar and radar tech? Yes, they did. They did massively, and it was very good for the US Navy that the British did, because the Royal Navy's ones was slightly better in terms of sonar. In terms of radar, the Americans rapidly caught up and then started doing quite well, because the British had the problem in that, in terms of radar, the RAF get very, 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 very focused on it. But the Royal Navy also do quite well, and the radar sets actually become very complementary, the British radar and the American radar sets. Stephen White, we are getting earthquakes in Mexico City. We are aware it can... Ooh, good luck. I hope you stay safe. Bellamora, after watching a video today, I feel a strong urge to watch The Cruel Sea again. I watch it regularly, don't worry. It's good to watch it. Devin Frederick, I went on a great coach tour one day from Cape Town, visiting Cape Town, some other places and the rest. Yeah, South Africa is lovely to go. Ian Carr, Hedgehog was based on the petard mortar principle, and hitting the submarine. Was a squid a development, or were they completely different systems? Actually, it was a bit of both. Okay, right then. So the system which leads to the development of the mortars starts in about 1928. So the Royal Navy have been using Aztec for 6 years in exercises, and they've noticed its problem. They've noticed its problem is you lose contact. So they start looking at it. By 1932, they have a mortar being set up. Now the trouble is, the mortars being used, it's got a problem in terms of the accuracy you're getting through of the initial results. So the only way to improve its likelihood of getting a target, if you're not that accurate, is to increase the number of mortar bombs. So you go to as many as you can, you develop the hedgehog. However, another strain of development was going on making the Aztec more accurate, getting a better communication going between it and the mortar. And so that's the line which produces the squid, which is why the hedgehog comes out in 1942 and then the squid follows in 1943, because the British have basically had 2 runs of development of mortars going on, and the hedgehog just produced earlier. And the hedgehog was easier to fit in ships which had the older Aztec. Martin Doherty, Doc, were the Mac ships designed too late due to the escort carriers coming on steam, and how desperate they need to be catapulted from a hurricane off the bow? Right, so, not for me. I don't know if the question is not for you, or if being catapulted off the bow is not for you. So, pretty much escort carriers are coming on stream, but how quickly are they coming on stream? Mac ships can come on stream quicker. And the big problem you have are the condors. Condors are a big problem. They allow wolf packs to find you. They are the satellite reconnaissance, all these things of their day. So if you can take them out, if you can stop them, every one of them you take out has a ripple impact. It might just not only just protect your convoy from getting wolf packed, it might not protect it, but it might well protect another convoy and another convoy and another convoy, because of replacing that condor and replacing that crew. And again, remember, for the Germans, every time they lose a crew in the Atlantic, every time they lose a submarine or an aircraft in the Atlantic, it doesn't matter if those people live or die, the Germans aren't going to get them back. They just won't. Okay. And basically, you do have to be pretty desperate, but if it's what's necessary, it's what's necessary to do that. But you do it. See, my dad spent months on slow convoy to the Philippines in 44, 45. Too much seasick. Oh, yes. He still swore at beans before he passed. Daniel Freeman, that's I expect you to at least mention the penguins from the chat we have been engaging in. Maybe. Roland Cash, in light of crew comfort issues and presumably terrible weather, how long would Atlantic convoy take on average? Could be let's see. You see, the big problem is the speed they're making. If they're doing 8 knots, it can take 3 or more weeks. But if they've got, it depends on tides and all sorts of things. So I'd say between 2 and 4 weeks, depending on the time of year and the speed of the convoy. Because at certain points, they did manage to get the convoy speeds up faster. At one point, they even had convoy speeds going at 10, 12 knots. But no, that's a bit of a sort of... Is there one I can use as an example? That would probably be best. Ooh, HX, that would be a good one. Convoy ONS5, actually. Now, if we take it, Convoy ONS5 is... Now, let's see, they left Liverpool, consisted on ships bound from Liverpool to Halifax. They departed Liverpool on 21st of April, 1943. And they managed to get to Halifax. When did they get to Halifax? Helpfully, my notes don't say when they got to Halifax. That's great. They left on... yes, they arrived 3 weeks later, 12th of May. So it's about... It can take 2 weeks if you're rushing, 4 weeks if you're going really slow, on average roughly 3 weeks. A good question. Right then. Paul from Chicago. Coincidence that the guy who designed the River Class Frigate is in the same yard as to design the Flower Class Corvette. And how far was this yard from Admiral Henderson's house? Okay. Yards were frequently visited by both Admiral Henderson and Stanley Goodall. So I'll leave it to your imagination. And by the way, the guy who designed both had been an apprentice of Stanley Goodall's. I've read that. I'm not sure about that, actually. I read that somewhere about a year or so ago in a little sort of web article. I haven't managed to check it up, but it wouldn't surprise me because Stanley Goodall, thanks to the Institute of Naval Architecture, did have a lot of apprentices and had a habit of spotting architects of talent and mentoring them. So they would call them apprentices at that time, sometimes, even if they were what you'd call mentees today. Daniel Freeman, do you mean armed merchant carriers or the... No, I think you mean Mac ships. Armed merchant carriers... Yeah. AMCs I tend to consider armed AMCs as armed merchant cruisers. Which is a fun time. Paul Johnson, my granddad was on convoys around South America and up to Vancouver. Was there a lot of U-boats in this theatre? Yes, there were. South America to Vancouver. Well, depends. If you're on the Vancouver run, let me remind myself of my geography. Now, it depends. Some of the convoys came from South America, came up this coast, and they were fairly safe if they kept onto the Pacific coast, right? But if he was one of the convoys which regularly did the east coast, the Atlantic coast of South America, through the Panama Canal up to Vancouver that way, as you can see, that's a nice dark area, and that was a very, very deadly zone with lots of U-boat activity. So it basically depends which side of the thing he is. And on this side, luckily the Japanese submarines couldn't really get there. They certainly tried, and I think a couple did actually manage to succeed, but it was very rare they could get there. Greg Selsky, it's not the same anyway. Is that it's the not having anywhere to land, which is the bigger problem than the catapult. Yeah, what you'd have to do is either try a nice friendly land space to land, or i.e. landing in Ireland, or you would ditch near a ship and get out and hope the ship could pick you up. In car, what was the planned speed of a slow convoy? 8 knots. 8 knots. Sometimes slower. Carl Gasberg, in Swordfish, the book, 12-8, and once even a 4-knot convoy mentioned. Yes, 4-knot convoys were, they were not really wanted, but when you were moving the volume of stuff you needed for D-Day and Operation Torch and these sort of things around the world, yeah, occasionally you end up with a 4-knot convoy. That's not good. 4 knots is just not. You see, the thing is, the whole point of the Wolfpack is if they can outmaneuver you and get in position, that's when you've got the problem. When you've got the sheer number, and that's the whole thing. The Wolfpack works by overwhelming the defences. It's kind of like a modern sort of plan for a missile saturation attack. You just have so many of these pinpricks going around you. And that's why the escort groups and the support groups and the distant escort groups work. You know, if you're looking at the Arctic convoys, you'd have an inner escort group which we centered on 2 destroyers and would have 5 or so sloops, corvettes, possibly trawlers, frigates, whatever was available as an inner group. You then have destroyers as an outer escort group, and then you'd have a support group which would have more destroyers or more sloops, etc., in that they could call on, or minesweepers if you were in certain parts of, you know, if you're heading up for Archangel, and you'd have cruisers, and you had all sorts of layers of defense they could call in for just that scenario, because it was the pack which did the damage. In Carl, were slower merchant ships diverted from the North American routes later in the war to speed up convoys? That was always the hope, but sometimes you don't have a choice. Albert Zarsky, how does squid differ from depth charge thrower in working principles? Did standard pre-war throwers had not enough range to be used out about, and that's why squids were designed? Squids are mortars. Depth charge thrower literally is chucking a depth charge. This is an explosive mortar bomb, which is boom. It's got a lot more range, it's got a lot more accuracy, and it's firing a far bigger round. If I remember correctly, a Mark 7 depth charge is 450 pounds. A squid mortar bomb is... yeah, it's a... Again, it's exactly the same, actually. It is 400, well, it's 200 kilograms, 440 pounds they've got here, but, you know, I'd say probably 450 pounds a kilogram. And yeah, but a squid is a far more heavy-duty weapon than a thrower. And you can still see them around. There are various installations where they're installed. But they're basically, it's designed so you have them, they will land in a sort of triangular pattern over their target. So it'll come down and go boom. And you get these 3 booms going off around you, and they'll take out your submarine. That's the whole idea. Dana from Dux Clark in Carbon Gas. Speed of a convoy product, not only of distance crossing port to port, but also of the zigzag and general movement to avoid U-boats, I guess. Yes, because there's your speed of advance, which could be 8 knots. The convoy's making 8 knots, turning this way. But its actual rate of progress could be considerably slower, because it's not doing 8 knots in a straight line from point A to point B. It's doing 8 knots. Oy, like that. Seamoink, how common was the hurricane capital ships in the Battle Atlantic? There were a few of them. Again, it's one of those things where there are exact figures given by certain people, and then you find other examples of them. So, I tend to avoid giving exact figures of these things when I am highly suspicious of those exact figures. Mainly because I have seen so much adaptation going on. So much adaptation. How fast were Liberty ships? I have no idea. I'll look it up. That's an interesting question. I have absolutely no idea. That doesn't look quite right to me. Let me just check something else quickly. Should have just gone to the book straight away, shouldn't I? Where is it? Ah, yes. No. Ah, there it is. Just a second. Okay. Interesting enough. 11.5 knots is their recorded maximum speed, but, you know. Don't know if anyone's going to have. I think I meant CAMs. Yeah, capital aircraft merchant ships, possibly. I'm about to Wikipedia check. I'm not only talking about. Yeah, you know. Felix B. Met in Pembroke Heritage Dockyard a gentleman in his 90s who fought on convoys never across the Atlantic. Therefore, he never got the Atlantic medal. He's still bummed about that. I can understand why. I do find some of the campaign medal systems awarded absurd. When was the refueling sea at first for the RN? Presumably this was fishing a fuel line out of water? Pretty much it was. The first methods used were a stern refueling, and I think it starts off in rough. It's sort of being tested prior to World War One, as it's one of the reasons given for making the Queen Elizabeth class oil fired. So it's sort of being tested before then. In Happy, the Germans concentrated on medium-range Type 7. How worthwhile would it have been to build more Type 9 to dilute the escort forces over far larger areas? It would have been far, far better. The Type 7C was the most common one, and that's a particularly interesting submarine. Owen Cash, was the Canadian Navy involved in their own plans for pre-World War II, or were they just a branch of the Royal Navy's plans? Okay, the Canadian Navy had some excellent thinkers who were absorbed into the Royal Navy quite wholeheartedly. But the trouble for them is that their government wasn't really willing. Well, they had financial issues to deal with in terms of their economy, and they weren't really willing to invest in the naval build-up in a navy at that point. So the thing was, they didn't really have. They were involved. There were Royal Canadian Navy officers involved at several levels within the Royal Navy, so they were involved in the planning, but they weren't really at a national level as part of the planning as they could have been. Strangely enough, New Zealand has almost more of an impact than Canada because they had a very, very activist Prime Minister who was heavily involved in these things. Roland Cash, Baron Nera. How come with fast merchant shipmen that did not need escorting? No ship didn't need escorting. There were some ships which was judged they would proceed without them and going at full speed the whole way. But those were very, very rare top-of-the-line cruise liners, and even then they didn't like doing it. The British would prefer to detach a fast escort with them. Hence, you'd sometimes find something like a Tribal Class Destroyer or a fast cruiser being used as an escort for a very fast liner. In Happy, how did they organise this immense effort? What was it? What ships going where with what cargoes in which convoys escorts? A job far larger than a team of programmers now with computers. Now for a large, it would be a massive job today. It was a massive job then. They had lots and lots of administrators, and it was a massive program. You had admirals and departments both sides of the Atlantic coordinating the escorts, let alone once you have whole government departments running these sort of first systems. So why I find it funny when people tell me, "Oh, we fought wars for small government or big government or whatever." You have government you need for the moment, for the time you are in, and the issues you're facing. It small, big, whatever size government doesn't really matter. What matters is you have the right size for the moment you're in. If you're in a major crisis, you're probably going to need slightly more of them than if you're in peacetime and everything's bubbling along easily. New IKB 472, the reminder notification did not work. We've been sorting this out. There is announcements now which go out on Discord whenever videos go live. I'm not sure if it works for the live ones, but I do know it does work with the recorded ones. Martin Dorothy, didn't the RN have to do a lot of remedial work to the Yank build escort carriers due to one exploding in the Clyde estuary which was suspect? Look, it wasn't that they had to do a lot of remedial work. They had to do Anglicization, as they would call it, and as part of this they did fit a lot of fire and extra safety measures, because the American approach, especially in the early wartime for them, was far more we can build lots of these so that our safety is in build numbers, and the British approach was our safety is in making the ship as survivable as possible. This is part of the reason why you end up with the Essex class being the mass-produced carrier of the US Navy, and the mass-produced carrier of the Royal Navy is the Light Fleet carrier. The reason is because the differences in sort of styles of how they're going to operate them and what they're looking for in the ships in terms of their survivability. Ben Laura, so squids are the closest World War II gets to Jellicoe's Fist of Doom. Yep. Golden Eagle, why did the Germans use such small guns for ship size? Actually, it's going to sound strange. The destroyer guns, they're armed with almost cruiser guns. So, you know, the destroyers, it seems to me sometimes the Germans seem to sit in weird ways both worlds. Sometimes they put in guns which are too big, because you put these big guns on destroyers, they can't fire that quickly. So yes, they can theoretically outrange a Tribal Class destroyer, but the reality is, if they're caught in a fjord with aforementioned Tribal Class destroyer, they're going to get one shot off for every 4 the Tribal's getting off, and at that range, in that manoeuvre with the Tribal coming down to it, those 4 shots are going to tell a lot of damage. In car, is it there? In Happy, I love the 1-ton depth charge. Sounds like, yeah, there's all sorts. There was a depth charge which was supposed to be fitted into a torpedo launcher, which we won't get into, but that is particularly strange. In car, is there a squid still used by the Royal Navy? Nope. I guess the squid's projectile sinks faster than the predetermined depth too. Yes, thanks to the greater energy going in. Martin Dorothy, Limbo was the direct descendant of the squid. Is that right? Yes, it was. Basically, you can go squid to Limbo. Hedgehog, as I said, is off one side. Sarah Thompson, Dr. Clark, in the classic The Enemy Below, in the opening engagement with the sub, a crew member loses fingers to depth charge rank, to the river rank. Was this Hollywood or was it common? Unfortunately, it was more common than you'd like it to be, especially with crew which had recently been trained, but it wasn't perhaps as common as that would make you think. HMS King George V, HMS Hood is an overweight escort. Yeah. Paul Johnson, Wiki says 11 knots. I presume that's about the Liberty ships. Yep. Gordon Collins. Were aircraft anti-submarine bombs contact or depth attitude activated? If depth activated, was the explosion depth preset, or could it be altered in a flight? Okay, I believe they're both contact and depth, but the depth was set pre-flight. It was just... No, don't get me started on those. Oh, God, those bombs. Seriously, on one hand, you have a 450-pound explosive device that has to get within 20 feet, possibly within 15 feet, to kill a submarine, right? You know this. You've done tests. You know this. On the other hand, you have an air ministry which tells you, which is telling the Navy that no, the only bomb you need for your aircraft to attack submarines is a 100-pound bomb. 100 pounds. Oh, caramba, why? Why? Come on. It's just pointless. I might as well be spitting at the submarine. I could drop my pen on it, it would do more damage. Just, why? You know, it's very easy. And what happens quite rapidly is, I'm fairly sure some of the kills which are credited to that particular anti-submarine bomb are complete and utter twaddle. I'm fairly sure that the only way they could have got those kills was if they were carrying Mark 7 depth charges, which they jury-rigged to drop from their aircraft. And 2, how quickly the freaking hood and fins enter service. I mean, literally, that must be the fastest development system known to mankind. And they did manage to figure in a thing that they could sort of adapt the depth a bit, but even then the depth was sort of prefixed before it went in. But it's still, come on. Ian Carr, the early war loss of the caterer to Courageous and Ark Royal also being at risk seems to have been put down to a flawed anti-submarine strategy. Had the strategy not been explored in war games? It had been explored tremendously. Okay? The thing is, you're dealing with a problem that you've got. Is a sort of, in exercises, it works. In exercises, you know where the enemy submarine's starting from. In exercises, you have all sorts of scenarios you don't know in peace. But also, what the British didn't realise was the German submarines could actually dive a bit deeper than the British ones. But added to all that, they have nothing else. Okay, this is the thing. If you look at how the escort groups in the anti-submarine escort groups, and especially the ones which are going out tracking them down, the support groups and the hunter groups, operating with an escort carrier, they're doing exactly the same operational strategy as was used by Courageous and Ark Royal. The actual system isn't bad. What's bad is that really you shouldn't be using a fleet carrier for this job because it's too high a value asset. An escort carrier being used for it, if an escort carrier is lost, you've got lots of replacements. If it hasn't, so it's the idea of using the aviation for it is a good idea. The practicalities of its implementation are what make it a bad idea and what make it readopted later on in the war when this new tactic suddenly emerges, which is exactly the same as the early tactic they were using. Dr. Clark, what do you find more interesting to talk about debate? Iowa versus Yamamoto or 80s refit Iowa versus Kirov? Yeah, I'll take either of those, honestly. It's always more fun myself is to work out what the Sverdlov class would be getting up to. John Luke, what would a modern day convoy escorts look like? Would it be a big ship designed to defend against massive missile attacks, IFG, or are missiles a waste of resources on convoy attacks? I have a feeling you're going to be looking at a bit of both. I have a feeling that if you would probably have some convoy escorts which would be Type 31, Type 26 sized. But the majority, especially if you were building a modern sloop, modern corvette, would probably be 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 ton rank. They would be built with just exactly enough weapon systems they need for doing the job. No frills, probably rotary UAVs rather than manned helicopters, all sorts of things. Calming Asmod, it takes a great deal of luck for a barely 10-knot surface U-boat to get into the launch position to nail a high 20+ knot fast liner, but not a 0% chance. That's the thing. And, you know. Bellner, what would a modern escort carrier, escort crash build program look like? Merchant helicopter carriers? Possibly you'd be looking at some of those, and you'll be looking at a merchant hull adapted to take the weapons that they needed for anti-submarine warfare. Daniel Freeman's pointing to super yachts. I can think of a few places which can produce something similar. Thomas Ryan, wargaming anti-submarine tactics. Check. The wargaming Wrens of the Western Approaches tactical unit. They were excellent, and they were actually part of the critical people who come up with the idea that the U-boats are coming inside the convoy. But what's interesting is there's been a disconnect there, because that one is you've got senior admirals who are going, who are suddenly going, no, and then they're convinced by that. But you then have the escort commanders. Quite a few of them have been adapting their escort groups because they thought that was happening. So you have two sides. Yes, it's often attributed to the wargaming group because that's quite a good thing for them to talk about wargaming and talk about their value. But you have it coming from both sides. You have it also the escort group commanders going, nicest way the submarines are inside our escort group. Because again, you're not dealing with stupid people being put in charge of running the escort groups. That's the thing. If you've managed to get to captain in the Royal Navy, or commander in the Royal Navy, or lieutenant commander in the Royal Navy, as you would be to commander those ships in the escort groups, let alone the guy in charge of it, you are not going to be a stupid person. You might be short-sighted, you might be annoying in some respects, but the likelihood of you being stupid enough not to realise that, hang on, the firing's coming from that way is very, very low. Sav Thompson, think you have wondered about that for longer than I care to admit. Thank you. Have wondered about that for longer than I care to admit. Glad to help. Grace Ashley, will the Air Ministry thought 303 was good enough for planes? So yeah, they're fun. They're good for their own fighter force. Yeah, to be fair, the RAF seemed to do all it could early in mid-war to lose the Atlantic War for the Iron. They don't. They try their best. They have other priorities. You have to remember they have a sincere conviction that what they're doing is the best, is best for the nation. Okay, that's what they think is the best use of the resources. It's a fight for resources, and it's also sincere commitment. You might judge it right, wrong in hindsight, but at the time you have to go with what you know. Run and Crash. Did submarines have armoured conning towers? And if so, what armour levels were there? None. As Greg Starsky, as Daniel Freeman points out, they didn't, but they were waiting for 20mm rather than compromising on 50 cal. Yeah, it's the trouble. The Air Ministry didn't like to compromise. Carl Gosman, 100-pound mods. Stuka pilot Rudolph used tiny 50-pound kilogram bomb to catch some fish in a river. Yeah. Okay. You know 50 kilogram is 110 pounds, right? Yeah, that's the thing. That 50 kilogram bomb is actually bigger than the 100-pound anti-submarine bomb. We all love the Sunderland in the RAF Museum in Henderson. It's wonderful. I take students there. I take my aero mechanical students from Kingston there. Usually I take the foundation year, and I borrow some 4th year master MN students as the group leaders, and we go there. It's fun. Absolutely. Armored flight deck doesn't protect from torpedoes. No, it doesn't, unfortunately. That was what torpedo bulges and various other torpedo defenses were for in the carriers. Unfortunately, Courageous hadn't had her upgrades for anti-submarine or anti-torpedo protection. Ian Carr, what was the most effective weapon against surface submarines later war? Rockets, 20mm cannon, or 40mm cannon, or other? 20mm cannon was fairly good. Rockets, very, very good. You'd often line up the rockets using the ley light and just go. You make enough holes in the pressure hull, that submarine ain't going anywhere. Baylor, so what would the Svoldovs be up to? Svoldovs were the Soviet Union's first generation of major cruisers built post Second World War, and they are really critical for understanding Gorshkov and Soviet naval diplomacy and what they are planning on doing with it. But that's really not today's topic, unfortunately. But that will be a topic another day. I hope. I hope someone will either ask me to do it or I'll do it, because Soviet naval diplomacy is quite cool. I'll probably do it in cover a bit of it in the other admirals thing when I do Gorshkov. Right then, how much? Bill from Chicago. How much difficulty? Probably similar. Did the separate military and naval structure of the UK cause? Would Britain have been better put off putting senior service in charge of everything? No, because sometimes, as much as I support the senior service Navy, I would say it's better to let them each have the lead in their spheres of influence. But the different cultures and the different way it generates thought and ideas actually causes for a better fusion and a better generation of policy in the end. The actual making it can look very much like you're making a sausages though. Happy, were the 50 old US destroyers worth the effort of rebuilding them into escorts? Yeah. Were they ever respected as British-built escorts? Probably some of them were okay in comparison to the V&Ws. Not compared to the new builds. Stafford Thompson, I think a new 21st century sloop would be around 4,500 tons, just given the size the ships have gone to. You see, that's definitely into frigate territory. I'm thinking, the reason I say 2,500 tons is I'm thinking of something which could be built in most yards, including most commercial yards. So probably they could get away with that quite quickly. And you could fit the stuff there. And you're basically talking something which is same size as a River Class Batch 2. Jeff Beelup just got here. Why did the River Class not get squid like the Castle Class Corvettes? Well, so here's the thing. The Castle Class are developments, also to an extent developments of the Flower Class, but they're slightly expanded and they're from another level of sloop. And the River Class don't get squid because of the ASDIC they're getting. Okay? To start off with, the Castle are getting the Type 14-7B as well as the their particular the more regular ASDIC, and Rivers aren't really getting those to start off with. They get upgraded with some of them in the end, but Hedgehog works quite well for them, and Hedgehog works fine, so don't upgrade unless you need to. Martin Doherty, was it on purpose RM put Max Horton in charge of Western approaches because he was ex-Samurai, or was he next in line up? Okay, so I've dealt with this before. Max Horton, in the Admiral's one, Max Horton takes over from a guy called Percy Noble, who's absolutely excellent and sets in place many of the things which are useful for the anti-submarine war. But the thing is, a bunch of people wanted a submariner put in charge to prosecute the war against the submarine. They thought it was to deal with the Americans, and most importantly to start to organise King and use his abilities for coordinating convoy escorts and these sort of things to advise King to better improve the situation on the east coast of the United States. And Max Hawthorne was put in charge in the UK. Max Hawthorne takes over a lot of things which Percy Noble had already started in process or set up, and then gets a lot of the credit. So, yeah, he was good, but I'm not sure if he's as good as some of his PR machine says he is. Golden Eagle. I have a feeling a modern escort carrier would be a small carrier that operates small fighters like Naval F-35 or J-15 or Saab Gripen. I have a feeling a small escort carrier would have to do a mixture of both. But I have a feeling... Oh, what's the Italian class? Italian Navy. I can try to remember the name of the ship for my life at the moment. They have some very nice little ships which are quite cute. Ah, yes. I have a feeling you're looking at something which is more the San Giorgio class. If you don't know what I mean. They are 8,000 tons roughly, the San Giorgios. And hang on, let's just move this. There you go. San Giorgios. They are rather cute ships, and you could add things to give them maybe a bit of a tweak so that they could take more, but you know. Sorry, I kept wanting to say Trieste and kept going, no, that's the wrong one, that's the new big one. That's the big one, and so that's why I had to look it up. San Giorgio. Steam Mind. Hedgehog mounts replacing second mount of Fletcher's effective forward firings at the side. Seems that not exploding till contact would keep Aztec effective till some are pinpointed. Pretty much. Polzensky, from what I observed, the Nimrod retirement still is a bit of a touchy subject. What's your opinion on the P8 Poseidon replacement story? It's off topic, but it's not that much off topic. I'm quite happy with going with it. Honestly, it seems to make sensible, and if we're getting it for airborne early warning, it makes sense. Honestly, if we're getting the same aircraft, you know, I would look into an intelligence version and I'd basically be using the same type of aircraft, the 737, for the basis of everything. Jeffrey, how did the Swordfish get rockets to attack U-boats with? Well, they started off by saying they couldn't be fitted with them, and then an artificer decided that he would give it a go, and after he'd shown them how he'd fitted it to them, the Navy went, yeah, we can operate them. Jeff Beeler, 100-pound bombs is great if you can always hit what you're aiming at, which of course, yeah. Look, nicest way, as I said, a 100-pound bomb on an anti-submarine warfare system basically is only going to work if it manages to go straight down the conning tower into the control room and blows that out. That would be how it would work. Worked pretty well. No Iron Brew today. I have managed to drink my Iron Brew already, Golden Eagle. While you work in Kingston, I went, yes, I teach academic skills and history of engineering to the engineering students there. 2 or 3 days a week, depending on the time of the year. Iron Car. But so no RN armoured flight carrier, the flight deck carriers were sunk. Nope, they weren't. They were hit, severely damaged, but I managed to keep going. Ian Carr. Modern day escort based on oil industry support ships? Possibly. They're quite generic hull design that's available and going down there. One Sims, Invincible Class Carrier and the proposed sea control ship Spanish Principal Deer was an example of a modern escort carrier. I'm not so sure, honestly. Look, in nicest way, an escort carrier, you're talking about an air group of 8 to 12 aircraft. You're not talking about something even as big as an Invincible Class. Invincible Class could take 24 helicopters and 18 Harriers, so we're talking an air group of 42, potentially. Yes, it's going to be crammed, and yes, it's very rare they actually ever ran that much, but that's what they theoretically could do. That's not escort carrier territory. That is battle carrier, fleet carrier territory in the British parlance. An escort carrier, you're talking 8 to 12 aircraft. Think about how small that can be. Carl von Gasmo, Dr. Clark, can you specify an area in Tom Clancy's Red Storm Rising convoy scenes? I don't like doing this, but I can say that honestly, I think they're too worried about killing their targets and not enough with driving them off. In wartime, it's about a mission kill as much as a kill. Folks, Ghana, hello to Belgium. Stafford Thompson, Dr. Clark, apologies, I was corrected in Discord last night. It was meant to be swapped, not swaffed. The most stable cat. Polsky, thank you. Pleasure. Ronald Cash, did any escorts have reinforced bows with U-boat ramming in mind? Let's put it this way. I wouldn't have wanted to be hit by pretty much any of the Royal Navy's corvettes or frigates or sloops. Any of them could not have been. It might not have been fun for me if I was a submarine. Angus Signal, £100 bomb might knock politely enough on the sub's hull to convince the crew to open up the hatch to see who's calling. That is a possibility. Yeah. Going, Rahamtavel, yep, is the Learjet still there? Yes, the Learjet is still there. Jemek, didn't Norwegian rebuild off the shelf oil industry into an OPV? I'm not sure if they did. I haven't heard about it. Carl Gaspard, thank you, Dr. Clark. Got to go. We'll see you live. See you live later. Take care, Carl. Thank you. Martin Doherty, Doc, is it true the Italian subs weren't that good in Atlantic, or is that just the Germans indulging in some Italian bashing? They needed some modifications, certainly, but honestly, if you look at their pound-for-pound kill ratio, they actually do slightly better than their German counterparts. So I frankly think it's Donitz doing some Italian bashing. It makes them feel good. But there again, Donitz thought his submarine force were amazing, and honestly, I'm not as impressed with the German submarine force. I think they do some very great feats, but I think that's largely in spite of some of the subs they're given, rather than because of them. What is the point of having an escort carrier if it only has 8 planes? Well, an escort carrier's purpose is to support out the group. They would take 8 to 12 aircraft. Some of them could fit more in the strike role. Some of them even got up to 24. But you really don't need that many aircraft. You're talking about, especially in a modern carrier scenario, you're dealing with escorts which might well have their own helicopters aboard, so therefore your escort carrier becomes more of a rapid reloader system for the escorts helicopters, as well as carrying some helicopters. You want enough fighters to maintain an alert cap. Not an actual cap, so probably in the air, but something on alert, which means you're probably talking about 6 aircraft needed to have 2 ready to go the moment you get a message. You're going to need airborne early warning. That's probably going to be either a rotary UAV, or it's going to be in a major war, or maybe it will be some sort of blimp. These are the things. The reality is you don't need a lot of aircraft if you're doing limited functions which an escort carrier is for. If you're doing those functions, you don't need a lot of aircraft. You need a lot of aircraft when you're doing the strike, when you're doing the battle group, when you're the task group, which is going in to face the enemy. When you're just defending a convoy, you don't need. You need enough fighters to be able to break up an enemy air attack. That isn't a lot of fighters. That it really isn't, especially when you're talking about long-range air attacks coming in. If there's a big long-range air attack coming in, there's going to be a big carrier battle group not far away, and they'll soon surge fighters your way. McEvertag, what happened to Mongo the Elephant that served on HMS Ship or Sub? I'm not sure who you're talking about. Can't believe it's been 10 years. Love to go visit. It's a lovely place. Currently all locked down. Simon, Ram Sub almost was Hunley with a spar torpedo. Yeah. Alright, back in a second. Please, add more questions. There's lots of space on them. Ooh. Right, I'd probably go for modified Black Swan. If I had to pick between a Corvette or a sloop, I would go with modified Black Swan sloop because, frankly, I'd be safer in that, and it's a far better anti-submarine shit unit. I teach at a few different universities, but the main one I teach at, the most regular one I teach at, is Kingston Uni, where I teach history, engineering, and academic skills. But I also have taught at other universities. I've taught a summer school at Cambridge. I've taught at King's. I still wandered around there, play quite regularly. Do all sorts of things. I go wherever. Basically, I am a early career researcher and a contract lecturer. So I am a mercenary. I will go wherever I'm paid. That is my literal policy. Stephen Thompson. So something around the size of an LSD for Convoy Escort Carrier. Have you had a chance to glance at my PSCG? Am I from Morocco concept? It's a nice concept. I have had a glance through it. I haven't managed to send you back some notes, but I have had a look through it. It's interesting. I'm enjoying it. But I think I will have some ideas for that one. Ian Cup. Edris Dreadnought, only battleship sub-ramming kill to date. Yes, I know. So Dreadnought has many firsts to her name. She is the first of her type, and she's the first and only to kill a submarine. New IKB 4472. Could an airborne early warning blimp be towed by a ship? Could it be kite parasol? Well, that's the interesting thing. It could be theoretically towed by a ship. And they are already looking at the potential of having a tethered UAV radar system in the next generation of area air defense destroyers. Because if you can get that radar up high enough, ooh, it makes the whole world very interesting. As Jeff Beeler puts, sloops were the best, but not enough of them, hence corvettes. Angus Sonal, would Project Habakkuk? Oh, good lord. It's one of those projects. I'm just going to check, because as I've said before at times, the joy of being dyslexic is you sometimes don't trust your first option. And I thought it was Pie Creek Carrier. If the Royal Navy had managed to build a Pie Creek Carrier, you wouldn't have needed Iceland. It was going to be colossal. It was going to be absolutely, immensely colossal. And that's the thing. If you'd had that sort of scenario, you could have avoided the need for Iceland. You could have avoided the need for a lot of things. Ian Carr, are Paravines still used? Not officially, but unofficially I'm fairly sure we have some somewhere just in case. Bulaski, Operation Pedestal. Seems like one giant rugby push to get the SS Ohio to Malta. What would the RN have used if she'd not been apparently under divine protection and sunk far earlier? They would have had to go it again, and it would have been another tanker, and they'd have just kept going until they get there. And Brendan Gargan, the thing I think people forget is the escort carriers' alert fighters are there to limit the number of possible concurrent attacks, letting the AA focus on one threat at a time. Pretty much. They're not there to intercept the attacks, they're there to distract the attacks. Gone Eagle, why did Japan not pay attention to escorts? Common explanation, they were not considering it honourable and didn't buy it. No, I don't buy it either. Basically, there's limitation of resources. And they put all their resources in the big shiny thing, and you know, they did. I've been over this with the small ships when we previously did the small ships. The Japanese did have some small ships, they just didn't have enough by any stretch of imagination. Randy Book, will you play Wargaming's Victory at Sea when it's released? So I've probably finished my book this time. I've got a list of games to go through. I have got about 6-7 games. I've got the brand new remastered Red Alert, which was the first ever computer game I ever bought. Well, I didn't buy. My sister gave it to me. It was the first ever computer game I ever got for a computer, and I'm not able to play it yet. It's come out. I ordered it ages ago. It was supposed to be my treat when the book was in, and the book's not yet in, so I can't play it. So it's absolutely torturing me at the moment. I want to go see if it's as good as my memory of it is. I used to love those things. It used to be dealing with the light tanks and the cruisers. Light tanks and cruisers. My light tanks would do all my searching, then cruisers would turn up and bushwhack everything. Ron Cash, was radar for aircraft detection present in all the convoys in the Atlantic Theatre to counter the Condors, or what other theatres needs for this equipment more pressing? Pretty much every convoy, every ship had air radar as soon as the Royal Navy could. So yeah, there was lots of ships with radar. Most of the corvettes had radar. All the corvettes I think are pretty much built with radar. At some point, either built with radar or retrofitted with it. Sloops all get radar as soon as they can. Radar is just as common as it can be, and that's half the trouble with the Royal Navy when it comes to upgrading radar, because it's what point do you stop development and just start production? Hey, Darren Plantanger, good day. Daniel Freeman, how interesting would a more modern convoy war be with the risks of active server sensors pushing navies to use passive sensors? It would be very, very interesting, especially as I can imagine the noise of the merchant ships and the fun that would be for the sonar teams on the ships. I honestly think what you might get about convoys, because they might decide, well, hang on, it's so noisy, the submarines are going to hear us coming anyway, we might as well actually start pinging. Or at least have a couple of the escorts pinging away, actually using their active, because that will just force the enemy submarines to keep further away. Well, of course I'm enjoying it, Stafford. I enjoy getting papers from people to read through, and I like to respond quicker than I am doing, but that's usually because I'm, at the moment, it's sorting the book through. Belinora, Rawalpindi was requisitioned before the German invasion of Poland. How widespread was this, and is the story of the RM pretending to be her in the Cold War during an exercise with the US? The RN ship did pretend to be her during the Cold War. During exercise with the US in the Gulf, and yeah, there was a lot of preparations going on before. The point I make is the Flower Class. The Royal Navy ordered the first batch of Flower Class Corvettes on the 25th of July 1939. I think they ordered about 60 of them. So the Flower Class Corvettes were ordered on the 25th of July 1939. They were laid down on the 19th of September 1939, but they'd been ordered in July that year. Jeff Bill, Atlantic Corvette was an example of a modern escort carrier. Yes, to an extent. She wasn't really designed to be used more than once. Martin Doherty, was the RN not being able to use Queen Stanwell too much of a hindrance, especially after the French chucked it? It was definitely a problem. It was definitely an issue. Jeff Beeler, iceberg carrier money better spent on escort carriers. It was in the end. Greg Salsky, to be honest, if they had built a Pie Creek carrier, they should have called it HMS Iceland. There were all sorts of ideas for how it might be, what it might be called. More scary was the fact that Mountbatten wanted to be its first commanding officer. Jerison, we used constant surveillance blimps in Afghanistan. Good fun. Not so much fun when they have competitions to bring it down using all sorts of weird weapons. Yes, that is the problem with them. Fox Tamer, how can I enroll to your class? Because I find it very interesting and I'm going to study engineering next year. You can find a load of the Sask stuff on actually on here, and I'm going to do some of the lectures I give. I'm going to actually put up as YouTube videos, just in case. I'm not sure how we're going to see it. So my theory is if there's a video as well, and then I do on YouTube, and then I do, which is free to see, and then I do a MS Teams is what we're mainly using at the moment, lecture, then the students have a video to go back to if they miss anything in the MS Teams. Abasowski, I think Hunts were more of an AA escort, great for Mediterranean or Channel, North Sea duty. Were they ever equipped with hedgehog or squids? Yes, they were. Some of them were equipped with that later in the war. Let's see, I have the details here. Why am I looking over there when it's right there next to me? Right, you have to remember that there were the batch type 1 of the Hunt class are fitted with 40 depth charges, 2 throwers and 1 rack. But as it goes on, they get far more, and they get far more sort of development for the anti-submarine role. Correctly. I do love that picture of them though. So the batch 2 carries 100 depth charges in with 2 throwers and 3 racks. Type 3, 110 depth charges, and type 4 is back to 40 depth charges. Now, don't think depth charges make them a secondary unit. They do still make them a very, very good unit, because in the nicest way, the Royal Navy was still doing a lot of the tag team stuff. And sometimes you produce a general purpose escort, and that's what, in many ways, the Hunts were, a general purpose escort. How effective were fat torpedoes? Brun Atkinson. I think you mean fast torpedoes, and they can be very effective. Jeff Hiller, when did convoys get big? Pretty much about the time that you start organising things for Torch and Normandy and all these things, the convoys start to get big and really big. Golden Eagle, seems like the Japanese didn't understand even unescorted convoys are better than no convoy. They had a lot of issues. To Joyce, 1971, if the Japanese had skipped Yamamoto and sunk those resources into escorts, would their war effort have been more successful? Okay, they might have been better able to resist the submarine attacks of the US Navy on their merchant marine, and they might have been able to convoy them and escort them, which could have allowed them to keep their economy going for longer and better. But ultimately, unless you're able to dictate to the United States Navy and the United States where it's going to focus its resources, you as the smaller power are always going to be found weaker, so they're always going to be able to take you out and basically destroy you in detail. So, as I've said before, the only real chance for the Japanese Navy and Japan to have been able to force and control how the Americans attack them, would have been to invade and capture Hawaii when they did Pearl Harbor, and to also manage to successfully damage the Panama Canal so that the US Navy couldn't use it. Because then the US Navy would have had to bring a lot of resources around the whole way around South America, rather than going through the Panama Canal, because that would have been also some months if damaged properly. Which would have given you a lot of time to prepare the Hawaiian Islands for defences, and if you could have moved enough land-based aircraft in there and all sorts of things and kept the fleet there, then when the Americans eventually do show up, you might well be able to go boom, boom, boom on them and win. But that means you've got to be basically, you've got the time, your fleet is free to go and support the other operations in Southeast Asia and attack British and all that stuff, right up until the Americans are at the point at which they can come across the ocean. But also you can use Hawaii to forward operate your submarine, so you have better intelligence on the Americans. So, you know, that's the only scenario that sort of works out for them. Ian Carr, HMS Manxman and Welshman, 45-knot mine layers, made trips from Gibraltar to Malta with emergency supplies. Any idea how many? I think it was about a dozen or so in total, but I'm not 100% sure. And they did basically go to full speed, top speed the whole way. They kept it up. Ben Gergen, Dust Clock, with the mention of blimp UAVs, would that mainly be for close range alertness with hunting for subs and sea skimmers, or for ASA AEW duties if they are small and fill one role? Probably they would be doing one or the other. They might be able to use the infrared for subs and sea skimmers and their airborne early warning, but it'd be pretty interesting watching them try. Tony Penfold, any of these ships get used in other theatres for convoy duties? All over. All over. River Class Frigates are turning up in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean, Castle Class turning up all over the place, sloops turning up all over the place. Basically, there are convoys going across around the world. This is the point I keep making. The convoys are happening worldwide. The escorts go worldwide with them, because the Royal Navy doesn't know where the submarines are going to turn up. Remember, the Germans have the milk cow submarines, so they can resupply at sea, which means the Royal Navy has to be really careful about them. Daniel Freeman, I had not thought about the noise of the merchant ships in modern convoy warfare as an issue. Thank you so much. Much to ponder. Yeah, they're so noisy compared to the military and the Navy ships that, frankly, you imagine that from your Navy passive sonars. Having some active and the rest passive makes sense. Rolling Cash, do you think a single Los Angeles class SSN could have won the Battle of the Atlantic? it would run out of torpedoes. Unless it could rearm, it would run out of torpedoes. Paul Johnson, Stanley Woodward pretended to be an Indian liner and fooled the American carrier before sinking her on next side. Yep. Jeff Beeler, Flower Class were initially small enough to be built on the Great Lakes in Canada. They were initially small enough to be built everywhere. Let's go. When the tribal destroyers are effective against submarine escorts, yes, they did actually knock up a few submarine kills, and they did do a few escort duties. Mainly, the tribals were mainly used for escorts of convoys going to places like Norway and Mediterranean. So, in terms of, and some of the Arctic convoys as well. So you do have a sort of different ships get used for different convoys. You look at your more powerful destroyers, your fleet destroyers, will tend to turn up on your more at-risk convoys. Bernora, why did convoys fall out of favour in the 19th century? Because no one wanted to escort them because it was annoying. It's a lot of paperwork and it's a lot of organisation and it's a lot of effort when you'd be rather off hunting the enemy. Ian Carr, Hunt Class Destroyers were no longer than the Black Swan Sloops. Exactly. They're both descendants of the Bitterns. Basically, the Hunt is a modified Bittern. The Black Swans are also modified Bitterns. Just one's called a sloop and one's called an escort destroyer. T1. HMS Audacity sunk by sub. Yep. But she was carrying an all-fighter air group at the time to take out Condors, which were the biggest threat to convoys in that area. Pulaski. Recently, the USA sent a few Burks and a fast combat support ship accompanied by an iron frigate into Barents Sea. Is this fast combat support ship a World War record or a Cold War relic, or is it something all navies have? Honestly, all navies would like it. Not all navies have one. Michelle Renafort. Use of submarines for ASW convoy escort? You probably would find that, but also that's going to tie down your submarine fleet. Remember, we have escort numbers have shrunk, but submarine numbers have shrunk even more. Same Penfold, what are the best books for submarine attack groups, please? Interesting question. Sorry about that. If you're looking for a very simplistic read, then this is fairly good. Jonathan Dimbley's Battle of the Atlantic. I'm not sure I agree with all of his assessments. He's pretty, on his own on some of them. Destroyer Actions, September 1939 to June 1940 by Mark Plevies, pretty good. Specifically, you probably want Castle Class Corvettes by Gordon. That's fairly good. And Arctic Convoys by Vice Admiral B.B. Schofield is also excellent. Anything else? The easier one to get of these on escort carriers is probably David Hobbs' book, Royal Navy Escort Carriers by Commander David Hobbs. But I have to say I prefer the Kenneth Pullman one. Just because I do. How to answer that question? Dan Freeman, if you got a Los Angeles class SA for World War II Battle Atlantic, I would just plop it in the Middle Atlantic and make use of the sonar. That's probably what you'd end up doing with it, definitely, because you'd run out of torpedoes quite quickly. But you would have something far better to supply of information than a mere joy that is Enigma. Definitely would be a better thing than an Enigma. Martin Doherty, didn't the RN use a captured German U-boat, Doc? Yes, they did. The RN captured several German U-boats throughout World War II, and they really did like to use them when they could. They learned a lot about them that way. Tony Penfold, it was a pleasure. Steph Johnson, don't forget to hit like, everyone. 24 out of 98 so far. Well, you know, please do like it. Please do subscribe. Please do all those other things. I really do like having more people to chat with. It's fun. I was actually doing conversation. One of the unrecorded videos, well, the videos which I recorded but didn't work, included in a whole little sort of thing of a thank you to everyone. So I might add that into another one of the ones coming up. Ben Groan, I would sort of expect an SSN to last through the war with the crew's own maintenance abilities, while a P8 will need a lot of maintenance fuel act and actual working. You see, the thing is, it would work. It would last through the war, but it's the case of you need a lot of torpedoes to make it viable as a weapon of war. It would be more a sensor platform. Paul Johnson, did any merchant ships sink a U-boat? Yes. One did manage to sink one on the surface with its gun. I forget the name of the merchant ship, but I know it happened. Sean Mack, actual working torpedoes. Hi, Sean. We always want actual working torpedoes. Angus O'Donnell, some days it simply needs to be acknowledged the bad tech days. Days when the Germans are hard at work. Yep. Jeff Hiller, are any modern merchant navy ships designed with helicopter operations in mind? Not normally, no. They'd have to be adopted. Tony Penfold, just bought Allied Coastal Force World War II, Volume 2, £10 eBay. Hope that's a good read. It is a very good read. I have Allied Coastal Forces in front of me. It's a very good read. It's literally sitting there. Stephen White, trip to Asugi Bay. Asugi, the base is shared by US and Japanese self-defense. Lots of Orions still there and on patrol. Yep, and they still work. As Eric points out, SSN requires a lot of maintenance from shore sports just for 6 months of deployment. They do. SSNs are maintenance hogs. Daniel Freeman, at least the modern SSNs use 21-inch torpedoes, and didn't Conqueror use a World War? Yes, she did, but still getting... Let's be honest, the 21-inch torpedoes available in 1939 and getting them to work in 1940s, getting them to work with a modern nuclear submarine, especially a modern one, could be interesting. Clock. Is it true there's still some whiskey at the bottom of Island? There's lots of whiskey around the world. Those bottles were sealed tight. Jermac, something to add about a used U-boat. A lot of times reading about Italian subs, I found something like, after 1943, that sub was used for training of Allied ASW. Were there interesting things learned? Yes, a lot of stuff was learned. And it was quite good to have them involved. And it gave them something productive to do. Ian Carr, would NATO or Russia need anything other than satellite surveillance to know what was going on the surface of the planet? Let's be honest, your satellites only work as long as they are able to see things. Then Freeman, Eric, I know, but you could just keep the degree of operative... Yeah. Paul Johnson, looked it up. U-633 sunk by SS Scorton by ramming. Thank you, Paul. Argument 1. The torpedo used by Conqueror was a World War II weapon, but it was worth bearing in mind it had been heavily modernised, had better range, speed, and more powerful warhead than the World War II version. Yeah, that's the thing that's often forgotten. It's so catchy to say they used the World War II torpedo. Ben Grogan, when the P8 was with the P8, I was less thinking about direct conflict, more that the info gain would mean likely next to zero convoys would ever be caught out, simply avoiding sub with a wide margin. That'd certainly be the dream, but you need a lot more than one P8 for it. Martin Doherty, is battleships with wings Coastal Command of World War II any good, Doc? Apart from objecting to its title, which I found a little bit absurd, when I did read a copy, it was actually had a lot of interesting information in. I'm not quite sure about the arguments of the person or the author, but I will leave that up to you. Paul from Chicago, were captured German submariners just bribed into helping? Not really. As a rule, they were either kept far away from the submarine, or if they were actually any help, it was because they were worried about what we might do to them. Or even worse, what if we might send them back. Polski, read a Liberator got into dogfight with a Condor off in the Atlantic. The convoy below said it was something out of Jules Verne's story. Could this happen one day? A P8 versus a Bear. If a P8 got into the I think the Bear would win, because I don't think the P8 has any weapons to do the engagement with. I really don't. So the Bear would win. The Bear has a tail gun. P8 could do with a tail gun. Or at least something. I'm hungry. I love you all, but I am hungry. So, I have a stockpile. Enjoy, Martin. I wouldn't want to use handguns against a P8 against a Bear. Also, I think the Bear might be able to fly higher than the P8. Aurora versus Bear. Again, still the Bear has an actual gun. Aurora will just go very, very fast past it. That might work. The RAF does seem to have demonstrated that they can hang a sidewinder or anything. I wouldn't be surprised. But the P8 has yet to have one yet. Incorporating fleet-wide modifications and ensuring interoperability in convoy groups must have been a nightmare in World War II. It was. It was very interesting because you had individual commanders who had their own methodologies or tactics which they often developed, especially ones who've been successful before, be very wedded to them. But also you had the fact that no two ships were ever exactly the same because their crews modified them. Ben Gerger, at Dr. Clark, P3RNs used to be fitted with pylon aim lines. Sidelines, so I suspect the same could be for the P8, probably. But at the moment I haven't heard they've been fitted with them yet. Sure, Matt, give it... Yeah, that's the thing. If the US is involved, it will be AMRAAMs. But honestly, if you're going to fit a missile, big missile on a P8, it's got to be Meteor, surely, because that's got far longer range. That's what you want, a Meteor. Give me a nice big long range. Then, of course, you could probably claim that you don't need aircraft carriers because you can have a P8 hanging over a task group with Meteors to do long range intercepts of any attacking targets. Well, JP, what is the biggest threat to modern merchant shipping? Well, if you're in range of it, land-based artillery is pretty darn nasty. Or land-based missiles. Aircraft has got to be considered, and submarines. So it's a mixture of those ones, basically. Any one of them is a massive danger to modern ships because you don't have to lose a lot of them to have lost a lot of tonnage of shipping. Because the ships these days are so much bigger. Dead soldiers to my left. I think you're talking about Wellington. And the tankmen. Yeah. Ooh, good job. Danny Freeman and Paul Frischberg. I guess the best bet would be a B-52 caught out dropping lots of mines. B-52 versus Bear. That would be definitely tail guns for ages. Paul's like, Doctor, I'm sorry, but all those... yes, on someone. Jeff Wheeler. The RCN was notorious for stripping unauthorized equipment from ships arriving in Halifax from Britain. Yeah... They then tend to get completely fitted back up, straight back on. Antonio David, imagine you get a blank check to modernise the IOs. What would they look like in the end? Nuclear power? Keep any to 406? Ooh, well, if I've got nuclear powered IOs, I'm going to go for railguns. I would want a BLS. Decent one. Probably Mark 53. Give me a nice mixture. A lot of railguns and a lot of lasers. Take care, Fox Gamer. Shomak, the ESN really needs carriers to fill the role the Essex class, Midway class filled, and then they will never get them. No, they won't. Excuse me a second, someone's called me. Sorry about that. Right, so. Ah, no, it's the empty bottles in the 18th century movie. Well, this is a collection of repurposed iron brew bottles, which are used for water. Mm-hmm. Ben Grown, is that the idea behind the B1R? Ditch fighters and have an arsenal bird of 30 plus AMRAAMs with one forward craft for data link? Pretty much. Daniel Freeman, I think the missile boat plane idea was the basis of the F-11B. Yeah, they were. Paul Zanks, the Iron Brew Doctor, dead soldiers are slang here in the USA for finished drinks. Well, basically I'm being environmentally friendly, but also all those bottles, barring one, were sent to me by my girlfriend, and so I keep them as a reminder of how very kind she is, and also a reminder of exactly how many egg custards I owe her. Daniel Frieden, oh god, a tailgun versus tailgun. I have visions of Bolton Pool Defiant. It'd certainly be fun. Vision. The USN convoyed ships during the 1980s tanker war, but an empty tanker took the lead because it could take a mine hit or two. Destroyers and frigates could not. Place for arm from merchant ships? Probably. But tankers are very different to other merchant ships, in that tankers have a lot of good subdivision, and a lot of things which make them actually very good at if they're taking hits, whereas container ships I'm not so sure about. Frankly, I have less faith in them. Schumacher, sounds like a drone vessel's job nowadays, and the Germans, according to Daniel Freeman, you filled them up with cork and stuff like that. Yeah, they did. It's basically, it's the old system. Every ship does have the ability to be a minesweeper once, and if you fill it with enough cork, maybe a couple of times. The tanker doesn't fare much better. It does keep afloat and keep going. The thing is, the tanker is a lot cheaper to repair than a destroyer, though. Graham McCarthy, Doug Luck, could the use of 6.1 turrets from Muggies as the Yamato's secondary armament be viewed as something of a design flaw? Honestly, the whole Yamatos can be in a way viewed as a bit of a design flaw. No, it would have been better to have something more suitable for their systems, but that was what was available, so that's what they go with. Certainly myself, I would have preferred something a little bit more in keeping with the ship. Trent McCarty, I can't help but feel that the Mark 8 AP shell from an Iowa would view 1 inch of armor as a little more than a polite reminder to explode in a fraction of a second. Yes, pretty much, but, you know, the point is, once you're dealing with that level of shell, the issue is, once you're dealing with 16 inches or 15 inches or even 14 inches of shell hitting you, you either have a huge amount of armor, which is a huge amount of weight, and it's more difficult to move for it to turn and all sorts of things, or you don't. Because the only way you're going to be able to stop that is by having a lot of armor, which is going to be a lot of weight, which is going to affect your other ship's performance. Or you accept the fact that if one of those shells hits the side turret, that side turret's gone. And you design the armour and the profile of the ship around that, so that if it goes up, it doesn't take the rest of the ship with it. Huff-Duff was possibly one of the most useful systems they had. It allows you, well, that's HFDF, and it's variations of some systems. It allows you to detect enemy radars, enemy missions, enemy radio chatter. The destroyers in the channel were regularly using it to listen into E-boats, and they would get a cue as to when they thought that E-boats were going to attack, because the Germans had so terrible radio security. Well, they put so much effort into the Enigma, and then their radar chatter was frankly atrocious. Nighttime Productions. Right. Just tuned in and count 9 empty iron brew bottles. Clearly missed a lot. All jokes aside, hello Dr. Clark. Hello Nighttime Productions. Bittern, in the Tanker War book, the tanker hit a mine and was then put at the front of the convoy. Warships following up behind it. Yeah. Probably hit one. Hits another. Tony Penfold, I thought you topped up those iron brew bottles from the Bowser outside. Shh. It's filled with water. Sam Thompson, Dutch Clark. Good luck with the dishes. Martin Durry, you'd love it up here, Doc. I live just around the corner from the iron brew factory. Have you stuck in a direct line? Or just gone straight for a pipe? Michael Swack, was Hesh ever used as a naval ordnance or considered as a naval ordnance? Yes. I think some variation of 4-inch rounds might actually be able to be described as it, but I don't think they were actually described as it. Ben Grogan, question of modern anti-ship missile attacks. Would the ideal situation be more land-based like P8 for greater saturation, or F-18s for the faster strikes? The ideal situation is using both. And coming from many, many directions. If you want to do your attack, you want to come from as many directions as possible. You want to spread the defenses out. Ben Grogan, also, how long engagement can COS actually sustain ammo-wise? Not as long as we'd like it to. Mitchell Oates, USN considered using Iowa class BBs to tank mines during First Gulf War if they'd done amphibious assault on Q8. Beacham if too heavily damaged. Not popular idea of the crew, obviously, no. But would probably have worked. C1, like self-sealing tanks on planes, why not have self-sealing hulls? It's something which has been looked at, but so far not provided anything. Maybe for smaller USVs at some point in the future. Unmanned surface vessels, possibly. One of the things that that helped in regular Enigma recracking was the talkiness of German communication. Yes, they did like to chat. Who was an escort leader, Gresham? There are a few escort leaders who are considered aces and very good. Greg Stowski, somewhere in Belgium, Bruges maybe, they have beer pipes from the brewery to the pubs. Martin Doherty, don't give them Mrs. Ideas, Mrs. Ideas doc. Just think of the money it would save in terms of actual transportation. Paul Zalski, Operation Step on the Legos. Ouch. And Night Production, have Atlantic convoys in a Cold War scenario where the Soviets pushing Western Europe ever been covered at all? Things like how it would play out as ASW Act. Bear in mind, I'm coming into this late. Not really. They haven't been talked about, so I'm quite happy to go into those. But I'm going to recharge my water bottle and my water glass first. That one's full. I drink way too much water. But leaving that to one side. So, in terms of a Cold War scenario, the idea was to try and block, using sort of hunter groups, block off and carriers, block off the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap. And then have escort groups with the convoys. So the idea was to try and thin down any attackers getting through before they got to the convoys. Now, the interesting thing is, of course, there is a weakness there. Iceland, which is what's pointed out in Red Storm Rising. How early will it be allowed to be reinforced? If Iceland's knocked out, that's a lot of extra coverage has to be covered by the P3s and the Nimrods and all the other systems. And that means the SOSUS line is broken, which causes more trouble. Now, sub-to-sub communication hasn't got any better in that period in the Cold War era than it has even to this day, actually, really. So the wolf packs are still going to be, to an extent, if they're using wolf pack groups, and they probably will do, because that's the most sensible attack doctrine for submarines against convoys, will most likely be loosely coordinated from central base. The nuclear submarines, yes, they are able to move faster, but if they move at higher speed, then they're louder and they're able to be heard coming. If they're heard coming from a long enough away, then they're going to be intercepted long before they get to the convoys. So if you're going to do that, you need to start, positioning them in front. It's basically, it makes the scenario more complicated, the Cold War, but it's still viable, but it comes back from both sides. Shumak, I fear that when the next war comes, that the USN will realise it's 1910'd itself and doesn't have the vessels to support the supercarriers. I have a feeling that they have worked this one out, and this is one of the reasons why they're now talking about frigates. Trouble is, will they get enough in time? Daniel Freeman, you're only drinking too much water if your serum sodium is dropping below 130 to 135, otherwise you're fine, assuming normal renal function. Thank you. I think I'm okay. Then. Good night, Minus, and take care. We're all mortals, and on Thursday it is Somerville, by the way, just a reminder. The Doctor is 35% water and 40% iron brew. I think that's understating my iron brew quotient. Go for 50% iron brew, 40% water. Jonathan, try living and working outside in Tucson. It's 102 Fahrenheit here. Yowza. Seriously, man. Go work in Iceland. It's cooler. Sam Thompson, now I think the good doctor's house would have iron brew fountains like the fruit punch ones in Mr. Deeds. Oh, tempting. Pulaski. In 1901, was iron brew enjoyed during the World War? Yes, it was. It was strong throughout the World Wars. In fact, iron brew starts off in 1901 as sort of both a nice non-alcoholic drink to drink from the temperance movement, but also as something which is supposed to stop you getting ill with the midges in Scotland. So it's sort of a health tonic as well. I think it was actually exported as well to the front in both wars. It was sent out quite dramatically around the world. So if you want to have the taste of some of the regiments enjoyed during World War I, the 1901 vintage is very nice, as you can see from my collection. Almazaski, did Escort and Hunter groups devise their individual tactics for protecting convoys, basing on their ship confidence experience, or was there a standard document made for that eventually? They would work together, and often the senior officer would take charge of the two groups and coordinate the two, but they would work together quite heavily. And it was they had a sort of standing operating doctrine, but they would quite also adapt and improvise as the scenario allowed. Pulzak, forgive us Yanks, iron brew is not a thing over here. Well, you know, I'm trying to start it as a thing over there. I think it should be enjoyed by everyone. Benamura, why the reluctance with US RNMN for diesel subs in recent years? Mainly because it's not so much a reluctance as it's you have to do it properly. And if you're going to do it properly, that means you need a certain number of subs. And that means you need to have the infrastructure to support them. And the trouble is, if you're making the case for nuclear subs, especially against the accountants and the treasury, and you say, oh, I also want to buy this diesel sub, and it's cheaper, and on them they go, it carries the same number of torpedoes, it carries this. Why don't you buy just these and buying SSNs? Becomes a problem. So you have to pick one or the other. You buy the SSN. You can generate the SSK capability easier. Take care, Tony. Benamora, also, has the good doctor had iron brew humbugs? Yes. Ice cream? Yes. I've been out to Scotland a number of times, and I have family up from there. Plus, we used to go up there when my dad was building ships in Glasgow. So I know Glasgow very well. And I like to go there when I can get to the archives there. Carl Anson, well, you don't have to worry about rattlesnakes around your house in the UK. No, we don't. We don't. That's one advantage. We do have to worry about foxes and badgers, but that's not really the same thing. Daniel Freeman, on the idea of World War III Battle Atlantic, would the USN use any of their CVNs for ASW, or would they keep them for other roles, leave it to little European carriers plus escorts? Well, they probably have to use them for some measure of ASW in the barrier. The big thing is they've got rid of the Vikings, and the Vikings were really, really useful for it. The Vikings were a justification for ASW capability in the carriers. I'm not sure if helicopters really matching the same thing. Intruders and Vikings are the biggest loss of the air groups. Ben Grogan, Dr. Clark, how far can subs actually detect a carrier-sized target sonar-wise? I've heard someone I know suggest that Chinese subs will be able to from nearly 400 kilometers away. I doubt it's quite that far in terms of the Chinese subs. I remember the Royal Navy said that a Astute class submarine could listen to New York Harbor from Rosyth, and I thought that was an overstated B star LL star CKS. I think you've probably got, in the nicest way, if carriers are designed to be quite quiet as well, relative to their size. So big merchant ships going around, that's going to obscure noise. So you're probably talking about 100 to 200 kilometers at most. Osprey 28, the most important ship in the convoy, the one carrying the Iron Brew. You sink the Iron Brew ship, the war will not be good for you. Shumak, Bell, my guess would be if they're being... I think I'll answer that one. Okay, Carnison. I had one on the front porch yesterday. Ooh, seriously? That's not good. Grosowski. Nuke subs probably better for the Pacific distance as well. They are for the Pacific. There again, if you're playing defensive, you know. On Doc, would you prefer the USN to go to the 26th rather than the Francis Marine and the RN make a mistake binning the Apollo class? Honestly, it would have been better if the USN had gone to the 26th, but they didn't. And the RN, yeah, I think keeping the Apollo class would have been great, but it's making the face, and now the Victoria class and the Canadians have the cost of keeping them operational. Enjoy Canada. Daniel Freeman, that is part of the excuse used, that I guess other allies have SSKs for a pan-NATO force, so no need for mixed fleets. That's part of the reasons used. Yeah. Jerison, accountants, quantity surveyors, and civil servants. Well, I teach the middle group occasionally. I know the cost of everything and the value of nothing. I'm going to keep quiet. Frederick Vago, hello. Unrelated to the topic of the video, which area of naval history do you specialize in? Right, so technically, if you're looking by publication, I specialize in the 1920s and 30s. I do that sort of era. However, I have taught everything from the ancient Greeks forward. I have taught explorers of the world, including Zheng He and Vasco da Gama and all sorts of people. It's a case of, in the nicest way, I'm kind of a generalist and I'm a bit of a super geek in that I love naval history. So when I'm not writing about it, I'm reading about other areas. So whilst I would say, if I was forced, I'd say naval history since 1850 onwards pretty much is what I tend to focus on. Basically, the moment things start getting engines, it tends to be when I start talking about them. But I have published a lot on cruisers, on naval aviation, on the Falklands War, on the Interwar, on World War II, on small ships. And my first book's going to be on tribal battle and daring class destroyers, so pre, during, and post the Second World War. Yeah, pretty much, you know, 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s if I have to be pushed, but I want to do so much on the Falklands War, though. Yeah, it's a mixture, basically. Okay. Right then, let's go up. I think I missed a whole lot of questions. Okay. Unrated, no. Canison, can they bring the Vikings back into service? I doubt it. They've been out of service for quite a while now. Then from could you replace the S3 Viking with something based on slotted into the new V22 DSN is getting as a cold plane? You could, but it's going to be very, very noisy with those particular rotors. Steph Thompson, I was under the impression the Osprey was supposed to replace the Viking. There have been people talk about it, but actually no one's actually done any proper work on it. Sean Mack, I'm going to call CRAP because the Chinese Navy isn't known for its passive sonar. Yeah, I would too. Nine Productions. I came across a list of US sub-incidents between the late 50s and 1990. That was since that I have since lost link. It was mentioned an incident where a diesel sub became vertical while submerged. That wouldn't surprise me. It depends on the scenario, but I could see them, depending on how they've manipulated things, ending up that way or that way. Paul Axe, converting boomers into cruise missile farms seems like one of the more intelligent things the US have done recent years. Do you think the Columbia class will carry a mixture? We can always hope, but I doubt they will. Jeff Beeler, does the RN still have a convoy dedicated unit? Not really. They don't. They all look at it, but they don't have a dedicated unit. Aga, to put it in perspective, you can hear humpback whales from 300 to 400 kilometers away. You can, but humpback whales are slightly more discernible than actually ship engines. Because, in nicest way, lots of ships sound like submarine engines at that distance. Pigeon, while watching this, a groundhog came right at me on the porch. I went to active sonar and it ran away across the street. Good for you. Dana Freeman, Martin Roddick, is the issue for the Finseretti Marinetti Marine versus Type 26 the lack of any hulls in the water with the Type 26? It might be a small buy and then switch to the Type 26. That's my thinking. I think the USN is going to buy a few of the first batch and then they're going to just look at it again. And I have a feeling if they decide they want a dedicated ASW asset, then the Royal Navy will end up getting a call going, we'd like some Type 26s, and it's going to become the ship of the Allies. Kai Anderson, the Columbia is boomer only. It is at the moment, but like with the Ohio's, they might find themselves adapted as time goes on. Subtons, Daniel Freeman, a V-22 based ASW platform, would it be much worse than a helicopter? Also, just use more show boys rather than dipping sonar. That is probably what you would have to do. It's the way the blades work that would make it more difficult. It'd be like using a Chinook for it. You have just that more complexity, that much more sound, that much more beat down on the water. Ben Grogan, with the advent of a helicopter, in a modern war, how fast could modern tankers be converted into gantry flight decks and how many hailers could they take? Pretty much as many as you want, and it depends how much effort you're planning on putting into it. Steph Thompson, Daniel Freeman, Dr. Clark. I believe the outlying factors are range, speed, and endurance, and station. As for station keeping, more than likely. Balzac Law, Ship of the Allies. To be honest, when I said Allies, I should have said the Anglosphere, which tends to work quite well. The Australians, Canadians, Royal Navy, and the Americans and New Zealanders do tend to share ship designs quite regularly. Bittern, would Sweden's Visby class corvettes make decent ASW escorts? PS though, it's not just groundhogs. Air Force fighter planes and C-130s are roaring over me today. Very noisy. Oof. Terrible. I would say potentially, but you'd have to do some modifications to them. And I'm not sure about them being used as long-range escorts. C1, lots of RAF pilots flying personal moths flew into my company airport, working at NAS Lamar base training on Sea Kings, I think, year-round over there. Nice. Right. It's often the Americans who do torpedo the idea, because the Americans want something which suits them specifically, and as they're the biggest supplier, they can get it, but and the biggest builder. But the trouble is, the others tend to want it as well. I think this occasion, the Allied advantage of building the same ship could definitely outweigh some of the issues. Daniel Freeman, I guess the Anglosphere Navy commonality is more about the interoperability rather than exactly the same ship being used. Type 26s will have different missile fits in different Commonwealth navies. Yes, they will, but they will have some very similar operating characteristics, some very similar performance states, some very similar engineering requirements, and lots of other parts. There's lots of components in the ship. So yes, some of their surface big ticket items will be different. But a lot of the inner side gubbings will actually be very similar, and that will help with a lot of the costs. Mondordi. America would have adopted the FAL if it wasn't for certain American general, can't remember his name, but he got the M14 adopted rather than the much better FAL. Jeff Beeler, I think it's Subrock, because I think Asrock has been succeeded by Subrock. So what is the present-day equivalent of Limbo, the ubiquitous ASW weapon? Asrock, homing torpedo? I think it's the Subrock, which is a homing torpedo, which is rocket-fired. Danny Freeman, I guess the advantage of ship design versus just about anything else is the difficulty of prototyping. So for once, the USN might be pleased to let someone else start. Might be. Paul Johnson, if the ship is built under license, how much comes back to the original designer? A lot. Bijan Jermak, I think a slightly larger Visby with drone hangar would make a good high-end small ship, small crew for the US Navy. Forward base in Japan, Singapore, and the Persian Gulf. Could do. Could do. Danny Freeman, no, the US doesn't. The RN doesn't use Subrock or similar. We have just torpedoes dropped by our helicopters. Balzac, it's amusing though. The last British frigate the USN acquired was far, far cheaper. I think it was the last British frigate that the USN acquired was a River Class. They did look at Leanders, but didn't work that well. Right, as the questions seem to be quietening down, I'm going to say I'm going to finish at 9 o'clock, which is in 10 minutes. Mainly because then I can go get some tea and recharge my water bottles and take the fluffy research assistant, who I'm currently hearing some quiet noises from, for his evening wander. Jeff Beeler, are there any histories of the Argentine submarine operations in the Falklands from their point of view? Yes, there are. No, I don't know where they are. I think you're going to have to go hunting that yourself. I can't remember where the book is. I think I have it, but I can't remember it. Danny Freeman, also, how burned do you think the USN is after LCS debacle and Zumwalt? The Zumwalts I will defend. The Zumwalts are a perfectly good design. The trouble was, everything was banked on them entering service with the rail guns at the same time. And really what they should have done is enter service with a 6-inch regular gun and the potential for the rail guns. And then they'd have been a massive success story and everyone would be really, really happy about them. That's the thing. LCS ship is a case of capabilities. For a literal fighting ship, I would look into Stradusky Corvettes, Sam's Espens, and Hangar Freres W. Hello. They do. The LCS became a Christmas tree project. It became the solution to every single problem the US Navy had. We have a problem with small surface boats. The LCS will deal with that. We have a problem with mines. The LCS will deal with that. We have a problem with this. The LCS will deal with that. And the trouble is, it can't do it. Nothing can do it. The interesting thing about the sloops in the 1930s is, and World War II, is they are designed to be reconfigured into the role by some physical rebuilding. Yes, it might be able to done by crew, but it's still some physical work. The LCS seem to try and make that sort of minimal and try to ignore that. As Paul Zuck says, LCS Zumwalts will be used. The hull is very good. Jeff Beeler, modern Type 14 possible? Modern Type 14 scenario. Type 14 wasn't really... It's good, but it wasn't that good. You're going to really enjoy Bilge Pumps. New episode comes out, I think, tomorrow morning. And another episode is coming out on Friday morning, UK time. That's Tuesday night American time, and Thursday night American time, or Monday or Wednesday morning British time, and Friday morning British time. So watch SimSec, because there are 2 bilge pumps coming out this week. Episodes 4 and 5. Martin Doherty, thanks. I'm away to take my 2 fluffy... someone tells me your old English sheepdogs are intelligent, they're liars. I have a standard poodle. He's never told me that sheepdogs are intelligent. He tells me they're lovely dogs and they give good hugs. But, to be honest, no. There again, the only dogs he seems to rate as intelligent are poodles and collies. That's one thing. Grace Halsey, Zumwalt railgun is the naval equivalent of the old adage with planes. Never develop new airframe and new power plant at the same time. Yeah. Antonio David, tanks have reactive armor, but ships do not. Why? Anti-ship warhead size and or speed makes it useless? Bingo. The sheer scale of the weapons you're dealing with at sea make it massive. Plus, there's this annoying thing called salt water, which tends to ruin reactive armor. Paulzak, where do I find bilge pumps? I would love to watch it, and I know I've missed things I've otherwise loved to watch. Well, Bilge Pumps is a podcast, and you can find them on the SimSec website. There is a link to them in all of the introduction videos for this series, all the introduction series have a link to the first Bilge Pumps podcast, and you can track on them. There are going. I'm not sure if this is going to work. Hopefully it does. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, and take care. Sorry to finish so abruptly at the end. I'm not sure if this is going to work. This does this. It's going a bit slowly. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. The mic is back alive, but the video is not working and all sorts of things. So thank you very much, everyone, and finished so abruptly at the end. Thank you. Sorry about the technical issues at the end. I'll try and stop it happening again in the future. Thank you. Take care. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. The mic is back alive, but the video is not working and all sorts of things. So the sound is awful. Finished so abruptly at the end. Thank you. Let's turn the gain down a bit. At the end. I'll try and stop it happening again in the future. Thank you. How's that? Is that better? I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. The mic is back alive, but the video is not working and all sorts of things. So the sound is awful. Right then. Thank you. Let's turn the gain down a bit. Everyone. Thank you. I'll try and stop it happening. Apologies for the technical issues at the end. How's that? Is that better? Why does now frozen? But the video is not working and all sorts of things. So the sound is awful. Right then. Thank you. Let's turn the gain down a bit. Everyone. Thank you. I'll try and stop it happening. Apologies for the technical issues at the end. How's that? Is that better? Why does now that's better? Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.